Hey everyone, welcome. If you can hear me, would you let me know in the chat box? Okay, awesome. All right. We've got like one more minute before we get going. So, welcome. I would love it if you'd share with us where you teach and also what you teach, what grade level in the chat box. Welcome Terry, Shamim, Melissa, Sufin, Anne. Welcome. I'm so excited you're here. Hello, Patty. Eileen, welcome. Hermione, welcome. Debbie, welcome. Got Laura teaching first grade in California. Marianne teaching reading in New York. Nicole in Minnesota, kinder teacher. Terry, Christine, Sue Ann, second grade teacher. Courtney, also a second grade teacher. Caitlin in Denver, welcome. Trisha in Florida. Kelly, Connecticut. Let's see. Marcia, Amanda. I'm glad I said your name right. I hate mispronouncing people's names. Sufin is a first grade teacher in New Jersey. Melissa, welcome. Shamim, my parents actually live in the same town that you do. That's funny. Janet, welcome. Deb, Alex, Mabel, Debbie. Hello, Denise. Hey, Allison, Hafsa, Charlene, Janet, Celine. Let's see who else. Hey, Laura. Thanks. Athena, welcome. Tracy, Nabila, Denise. All right, well, it is that time. I want to go ahead and get going because I have a lot to share with you as always. Thank you so much for being here. Just a couple of tech help tips before we get started. Make sure you're using the Google Chrome browser. If you're not and it's going fine, then don't change it. But if you are having issues at any point, try that. That's what they recommend. You can always go back to those emails should we get disconnected. Fingers crossed it all goes well, but should you have problems, there should be a reconnect button on your end. You can always go back to those emails and rejoin. So just try different things until something works if you have any tech issues, but I hope it will be smooth sailing. I'm going to go ahead and, excuse me, switch over to my slides now. Excited you're here. This is definitely one of my favorite topics to talk about. It's personally something that's challenged me a lot, and so that's why I have such an interest in learning and sharing how to teach kids to revise and edit even at a very young age. A couple of housekeeping items before we get going. You should right now be able to see the first slide of my presentation, and there is a short delay. So whatever you're hearing me say right now, I actually said like 20 seconds ago. So just something to keep in mind. Speaking of the chat box and the delay, I do want to encourage you to use the chat box. I love it when you ask questions. I love it when you answer each other's questions. Add on to what I'm saying. We can all learn from each other here. So definitely make use of the chat box. You may want to grab a pencil and paper to take a few notes. I will let you know, hey, this is in your freebie, or you don't need to write this down. So I'll kind of give you a heads up, but you may want to jot a couple of things down. And as I say before I teach any workshop, I'm sharing what I've learned from my experience as a classroom teacher and also a literacy specialist. Ultimately, I do know your school, your district may have different mandates from what I'm sharing here. And then, of course, we all have to do what we feel is best for the kids in front of us. So that said, if you have been on a webinar with me before, welcome back. I'm so excited that you came back for more. And if we are not acquainted yet, my name is Allison, and as I said, I'm a literacy specialist working with pre-K this year. So I actually started my teaching career teaching pre-K in the public schools. I taught kindergarten for several years, also taught first and second before becoming a literacy specialist. And I pretty recently moved to Nashville. My husband, Jonathan, and I were living in the Chicago area and wanted to be closer to my family and wanted some warmer weather. So we decided to move, and we love it so far. We've got 2 little fur babies, Max and Lindsay. So that's me. So now I want to talk about you. On a scale of 1 to 3, right now in the school year, obviously a lot of us are still pretty early on, just a couple of months in. But as of right now, how well do you say your students typically do when you ask them to revise and edit their writing? Are they at kind of a 1 where they're not doing super well or they're just not ready for it yet? Or do you feel like they're at a 3, not perfection, but things are rolling well when you do ask them to revise and edit? Go ahead and let me know in the chat box. Seen a lot of 1s, -1. 2, 0. I love these alternative numbers. I haven't gotten that yet this week. You guys are fun. Okay, so I see a lot of 1s. And you know what? If you're teaching kindergarten or something like that right now, at this time in the school year, your kids probably are going to be at a 1, right? Because depending on how high your kids came in, you're maybe just teaching them how to draw with details. You are teaching them how to label. So obviously revising and editing is not an expectation that you would have for them right now. But if you're at a 1, I hope that after tonight, you're going to walk away feeling more prepared to teach revising and editing. And then even if you're at a 3, I hope that you'll still have some new ideas that you can take with you, some freebies that I'm going to be giving out, just some new things to keep your kids engaged in and excited about revising and editing throughout the school year. And speaking of throughout the school year, I do want to mention, I'm going to be sharing a lot tonight. Definitely hang on to, the freebie that you're going to get at the end. Hang on to your notes, because these are things I hope that you will be able to use throughout the school year. So even if your kids just are not there yet, hang on to this stuff. Come back to it. My goal is to give you stuff that you can use, not all at once, of course, but things that you can take with you and use throughout the school year. So here is what is on our agenda. We're going to start by talking about the different stages in the writing process and looking at the writing process maybe in a way that's new to you. We're going to talk very briefly about what the Common Core standards say about teaching, revising, and editing. Before I moved to Tennessee, I was in a Common Core state, Illinois, and even if you don't use the Common Core standards, what I'm going to share here can be applied to your own standards. I'm just going to show you how I look at the standards and kind of break them down, and then you can do that with whatever standards you do have. I'll share, what does it mean at a kinder, first, second grade level? What does it look like? What does revising look like at this, stage in the game? I'll share some research-based strategies for teaching revising. Same thing with editing, research-based strategies. During this part, I'm going to talk about how you can make revising and editing just part of your daily routine. And during this part, I'm going to share some information about a revising and editing table. It's a relatively simple thing that you can set up in your classroom, but it has been a total game changer for me when I'm teaching first and second. It's just totally taken my kids from being like, I'm done, and not looking over their work, to actually wanting to revise and edit their work. So definitely make sure that you stick around for this part. And then at the very end, I'm going to share some information with you about resources that I have for teaching, revising, and editing. And we have a big giveaway tonight. So normally when I do a giveaway on other shops, I'll pull some names, and those people that were live and that won, they'll walk away with one resource. But tonight, the giveaway is actually 3 things. So you definitely want to make sure that you stick around for that. I'll be pulling names at the very end, and you've got to be here live to win. Also at the very end, I'm going to share the freebie with you that you can download, printable stuff that you can use. And kind of throughout here, after every section or so, I will stop. I'll try to answer a question or 2. And then at the end, I'll stick around and answer as many questions as I can. So that is the plan. Okie doke. So you may know that I've done some previous workshops on the writing workshop approach. I'm not going to go too far in depth on that. That's a whole other workshop. But I do want to give you a little context. I want you to understand how I teach writing on a daily basis, even if you teach it differently, just knowing that when I talk about things tonight, this is like my lens, this is how I do things. I think that'll help. So I use the writing workshop approach. I teach in units that are structured around different genres, informational writing, for example, personal narratives, stuff like that. All of the kids during a unit, they're writing in that genre, but they're working on their own projects. So, we're doing personal narratives. One child's writing about when they broke their arm. Another child's writing about when they went to the zoo. They're choosing different topics and they're working at their own pace. So a good amount of choice is involved. So just to give you a sense of what it looks like on a daily basis, start with the mini lesson. That's about 10 minutes. Then the kids write. How long the kids write for depends on, what my schedule is like, what your schedule is like. It'll vary if you use the workshop approach. But as you can see, the majority of the workshop should be their writing time because that's practice, right? So that could be, 20, 30 minutes, just depends. Then we do sharing time at the end, which is about 5 minutes. And so that's kind of what it looks like every day in the writing workshop. Now, if you use an approach that's different, no worries. What I am going to share tonight can be used really however you teach writing. So even if you teach writing a little bit differently, no problem. All of this stuff will still apply to you for sure. Excuse me. Okay, so we typically teach kids that writing is a process, right? We want them to understand that it's not a one and done kind of thing. We want them to know that writers go through stages during the development of a piece of writing. And these are usually the stages that we teach kids. Sometimes they have different names, but generally speaking, we say, okay, so the author plans or does pre-writing, then comes drafting, revising, editing, and then publishing or sharing, right? So this approach, right, is linear, different steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. But the reality is this: proficient adult writers revise frequently both during writing and after completing a draft. So to make this concrete, just think for a second about the last time that you wrote an email to maybe your principal or to a parent. So you probably, before you started writing, you probably had some ideas about what you wanted to say. You sit down, you type a couple of sentences out. As you're going, if you think that you want to, reword something or fix a typo, you probably do that as you go, right? And then, maybe you type out a couple of sentences and then you stop, you reread them, and then you type a couple more. Maybe you plan what's next, go back, fix it. So basically, when you do that email, by the time you're done, you haven't gone through stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in strict order like this, right? You've done some revising and editing as you're going. So it's not necessarily these straight 5 steps like we tend to teach, right? The reality is that writing is a recursive process. It's cyclical. So, like with the email example, you planned out a little bit, you drafted some, you revised, you edited, and then you came back to more planning within the same email. And you probably don't even think about this, right? You just do this automatically as a proficient adult writer. But the complexity of the writing process is what makes teaching, revising, and editing tricky. Well, one of the things that makes it tricky, right? It's a complex process. And I'm not necessarily saying that kinders, first graders, second graders have to fully understand that it's a recursive process. They don't necessarily need to understand how complicated it is yet, right? But if we, as their teachers, are aware of, what the writing process really is like, then it does help us at least model for our kids, as we're writing, we change things, we fix things. We can show them in our modeling, how it's a little bit more complex than this sort of set of, set stages. Okay, so I mentioned we were going to touch briefly on the Common Core standards. What I'm going to say here can be probably applied to your standards too. The Common Core standards do support teaching writing as a process. And the anchor standard from the Common Core that has to do with revising and editing is Writing Standard 5. And Writing Standard 5 says, develop and strengthen writing as needed by planning, revising, editing, rewriting, or trying a new approach. So that's our ultimate goal, or if you use the Common Core, that's your ultimate goal for students when they walk out of 12th grade. So throughout K-12, kinder, first, second, that standard is broken down, and then it's addressed, what does that look like at a kindergarten level? What does that look like at a first grade level? It's broken down into the different grade levels. So the one thing that I want to mention here, and this applies to no matter what standard or standards you're using, it's really helpful to not only look at your standard, but also to look at the grade level below yours and the grade level above, and the grade level above yours. So you can kind of see where the kids hopefully should be, maybe some things that you need to review when they're coming in, and then what the goal is, what they're going to be asked to do the year after they're with you. So just looking at these particular standards real quick, the Common Core standards say that in kindergarten, kids are expected to respond to questions about their writing, get suggestions from their peers, add details to their writing with teacher support. That's super key. The first grade standard is pretty similar, but as you can see in the blue text, they added that kids are supposed to get help with focusing on a topic, right? Second grade standard mentions revising and editing for the first time. At this age, I'm trying to get them, using those terms more, understanding the different stages in the writing process more clearly. And then the third grade standard, this just talks about how the kids are expected to not only get help like after they're done with a piece or after they've drafted, but also when they're developing the writing, when they're planning the writing, they're really supposed to get support and guidance from their peers, from adults, just about throughout the entire set of stages in the writing process. All right, let's see if I missed any questions. So thank you to everyone who is providing tech help. Margot, I'm so sorry you're having trouble. Let me put up some tech help tips. Let's see if that helps anybody. Again, thanks to you guys who are helping out and giving suggestions. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to keep rolling, but feel free to type them in. I'll get to them next time. Okay, so now we're going to spend some time talking about what the research says about teaching revising and some strategies to help get our kids to revise a little more independently. When we're talking about revising, we're really focusing on content, right? We're not worrying about little mistakes like punctuation, capitalization, stuff like that. That's considered to be part of editing. This is part of what makes revising so hard, right? Someone on this workshop last night, said that she thinks of and presents revising to her kids as revisiting. And the word revising comes from, I don't know, some Latin or Greek word that just means like to view again or to see again. So to me, that just says that we need to eventually get our kids to try to see their writing with new eyes, which is hard, right? Even as adults, we become sort of attached to our writing. Like we're like, oh, well, this is the only way you could write this or say this. And then somebody comes in and has a totally different idea. It's hard to do that for us, right? It's hard for us to do it. So it's even harder for our kids to do it just as beginning writers. But when we are teaching them how to revise, we want them to consider things like purpose. Are they trying to, for example, convince the reader of something? Is it an opinion piece? So did they accomplish that? We want them to think about their audience too. They reread their piece of writing and ask themselves, if I was somebody who was reading this for the first time, learning about this nonfiction topic in this book that I wrote, would I have enough information? It's just one example. We want them to think about organization too. This one I feel like is at least a little bit easier than some of the other ones. Is there a beginning, middle, and end, right? Are the beginning, middle, and end in order? Is, if it's a nonfiction book, is it divided into sections by, what giraffes eat, where giraffes live, right? Is it organized that way? Word choice is another thing that we can get them to consider. Did they use interesting words? If they were writing something, nonfiction, did they use specific vocabulary that goes with the topic? They're writing about elephants. Did they use words like tusk? And then the last thing I want them to consider, among others, of course, did they write in complete sentences? Are their sentences varied in length? Do their sentences flow well? These are all things that we want them to think about eventually when we're teaching them how to revise. So, research has identified some best practices that are most effective in getting kids to kind of tackle and be successful with this challenging task of revising. And 3 of these are: we need to provide specific criteria for our kids so they know what they should be revising for. We need to teach strategies through the gradual release of responsibility. And then we need to do both of these things and implement peer revising. So now we're going to go more in depth on each one of these. So I just saw someone say that providing a checklist has helped my students very much. And yes, absolutely. So like I said, we've got to show our kids what we expect. And a rubric or a checklist is a great way to do that. So when it comes to primary kids, a rubric is a lot of text, right? They have to learn to read across or pretend read. I like to put a lot of visuals on my rubrics. If you have my kinder first or second grade writing units, then there's usually visuals all over. Whether you use smiley faces or you want to use stars or whatever your preference is. But when our kids are just learning how to read, it is helpful to have visuals on our rubrics. And then another thing that I like to do with the rubric is, like I said, it's a lot of text, right? When I'm teaching a rubric for the first time, I like to physically cut it apart. So, I would take scissors and just cut this one strip and show it to them. And maybe they have their own strips that they use to look at their own writing. And we just look at that one row at a time. So you can physically cut your rubrics apart. And, obviously you wouldn't do that like toward the end of the year when the kids know how to use rubrics and it's a lot easier for them. But in the beginning, it's okay to just teach them like one part of the rubric at a time, right? You can physically cut it apart to help them focus, to help teach them to read across like this before you present them the rubric as a whole. Of course, when we're using rubrics and checklists, we have to actually explicitly teach our students how to use them. Last night, I forgot that I had done this, but it just came to me when I was talking about this. I remembered when I was student teaching, I had this project. I don't remember what it was, but we had to use a rubric. Rubrics were coming back or big at that time. And so I had this rubric that I made for my kids and I read it to them. I just read it out loud and they weren't able to use it. Well, big surprise, right? We can't just read it to them and expect them to know A, how to use it, and B, how to use it to even improve their work. So we have to do more than that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through what I might say to my students when I'm modeling how to use a rubric. So let's imagine that we're doing a first grade how to writing unit. So this, I believe I put this in your freebie. I have many, but this is one how to writing rubric I believe I created for first grade. And so let's imagine that it's like right now in the year, right? The kids have been here for a couple months. We're not super familiar with rubrics. So I'm just going to get them to focus on one part of the rubric at a time. And I took this from that rubric I showed you a minute ago. This is just the first row. So the bottom 2 pages here are from a writing sample that I created. I do a lot of that when I'm teaching revising and editing because I want to have some stuff, like I'll intentionally put stuff in there that could be made better so that I can show them how I, fix things up and whatnot. But so basically, if I were doing this lesson with you, my first graders, I would have these up on the board. Interactive whiteboard is great so that you can write on it and things. But I would read you these 2 pages in the piece. And just in case it's blurry for you, I will read it to you now. So it says, first, you need to squeeze a little toothpaste onto your toothbrush. Don't use too much. Next, put the toothbrush in your mouth. Start brushing your teeth. Make little circles with your brush. When you are done, spit out the toothpaste in the sink. Rinse your mouth out with some water and clean your brush too. Now you are done brushing your teeth. So after I read it to my kids, then I'm going to say something like, now I'm going to use the rubric, boys and girls, to figure out how we might make this writing even better. I look at the rubric just 1 row at a time. So here's where I would have cut it apart. Or you can just use color highlighting for the different rows. Or you can just cover up the rest of the rubric so that they're only focused on this 1 row. But it is helpful to have some kind of visual just so that they focus in on it so that they know what you're talking about. Okay, so then what I would say to them is something like, the first row says, does my book use 3 or more steps to teach the reader how to do something? And then there are 3 choices. Does my book not have steps that teach? Does it have 1 or 2 steps? Or does it have 3 steps? I ask myself which one of these choices is true for this piece of writing. Well, let's go back to the writing and find the steps. Here it says, first you need to squeeze a little toothpaste onto your toothbrush. That's 1 step. Next, put the toothbrush in your mouth. That's a 2nd step. That's number 2. Then we have start brushing your teeth, number 3. When you are done, spit out the toothpaste, rinse your mouth out. So we have more than 3 steps actually. So I would circle the part on the rubric that says yes, 3 steps. So now depending upon where we were, that might be my whole lesson. If we were just introducing rubrics and they're just not familiar with them, what I would then do is I would give them their own little strips that were identical. I'd say, okay, now I want you to go back to the last how-to writing book that you finished because they're writing multiple ones. And what I would like you to do, boys and girls, is I want you to look at this part of the rubric and count the steps in your piece of writing and figure out where you are on the rubric. So that's what I would do if we were just, just starting out. I might also want to show them, hey, another sample, maybe it only has 1 or 2 steps. I would show them how I would fix it too. If we, maybe they were a little bit familiar with rubrics, then I might teach them a couple of more rows, right? And I would want to make sure that this sample piece had some, not terrible mistakes, but some things that could be corrected. So like with this example, there was nothing to correct, but I would build into the sample some different mistakes. Like with this one, there's no list of supplies at the beginning. So if I were using this, that's something that I would address because I think, so that's the 2nd row on the rubric. So again, with the sample piece that I'm creating, I want it to be decent, but I want there to be some room for growth. So when I show them, some things will be at yes, but some things will not be there. And I'll model how to get the piece to that point, if that makes sense. Another thing that you might want to consider is giving different kids different rubrics or checklists. And so I don't mean that you're going to give every kid in your class a different rubric. That would just be absurd. But you could, maybe would you consider having a more challenging rubric for your higher kids so that they don't feel like, hey, I did everything on the rubric that everybody gets and, now I don't need to try any harder. If you give them a little bit more challenging rubric, then that could help extend their learning, right? Similarly, if you have a group of really low kids and you're giving them the rubric that everybody gets, that might be too overwhelming for them, right? Maybe you want to give them a smaller rubric or the rubric's modified a little bit. It's not necessarily that you're lowering your expectations, but the process of learning to write is just that. It's a process. So your kids are where they are. And maybe it would be less overwhelming for your struggling students if you tailored the expectations to things that were really reasonable for them. Just something to think about. Okay, so back on that slide of research-based best practices for teaching revising, the second thing on that list was to teach kids to revise using the gradual release of responsibility. And a lot of us probably are already familiar with this concept, but basically it just means that we work our students toward being able to use a revising strategy independently by giving them more of the work little by little. So the first thing we would do is we would explain it. This revising strategy is helpful, or this is what it is. This is helpful because, giving them a reason so they understand why they're doing it. We want to model for them, provide think alouds, right? And then we want to give them some guided practice, probably a lot of guided practice, because, at this age level, a lot of the revising that they're going to be doing is probably going to be guided. So guided practice can take the form of maybe you have chart paper up and you've written a little text as a sample, and then they help you revise the text, right? Or maybe they have pieces of writing that they've finished or almost finished, and you partner them up so that they have, support. And then you go around and you provide them support. A lot of revising for me also takes place in one-on-one writing conferences because, again, revising at this age, it's challenging. It's very helpful for me to kind of sit with them and help them figure out how to revise their work. You can do it in a small group as well, right? And so then, of course, our ultimate goal is for students to be able to automatically, or with some thought, apply the strategy on their own. And for my first grade teacher friends, this may not be something that we see all year or till the very end of the year, but we've still got to work in that direction, even if we're doing, mostly guided practice and they're not doing a ton of it on their own. We've got to work in that direction. We're laying the foundations. As they get older, they are going to become more proficient with revising, but we've got to do a lot of this so that we get them going in the right direction. And when you're using the gradual release model, we've got to really include a lot of repetition. So repetition looks like, maybe you're modeling a strategy now, and then maybe you're remodeling it in December and March and May, right? What I've found is that kids tend to be developmentally ready to learn a strategy at different times in the year. So in some, for some evaluations I've had to do, the format is you teach a lesson, and I'm not talking about just writing, I'm talking about just in general. Sometimes the expectation is that within one lesson, you model, think aloud, right? Kids have guided practice and independent practice, right? That's kind of how I learned to do it. That's supposed to be the ideal lesson. But the fact is that not all of your kids are going to be ready to, revise totally independently in just one lesson. Modeling, explaining, thinking aloud, that can take place over a couple of days. Guided practice can take place over many days, right? It's not sort of you do this in one lesson and you're good to go. You've got to revisit it over multiple days, but also include a lot of repetition throughout the year. The more you repeat yourself, right? You may feel like a broken record, but the words that you're saying as you're modeling and thinking aloud for kids, that's what becomes the words in their heads as they're thinking to themselves about a piece of writing and they're revising. So repetition is so valuable, especially because this is a more challenging skill to teach. And we want kids, when they revise their writing, we want them to eventually look at their writing and be like, oh, well, I'm going to add some stronger words. I'm going to add in more details. I'm going to rearrange parts of this. But with kids at the primary level, at least in the beginning, I found it super helpful if I only focus on one revision strategy at a time. So the way I do this is when I plan my writing units, which some of you know already because you use the units, I schedule in revision mini lessons every so often. And during the unit, typically the revision mini lessons teach just one specific strategy. So here's an example. Let's say we're doing a nonfiction writing unit. In that unit, we've been working on our books, and maybe I've modeled a piece of writing and I've got something that's just about done, and now I want to show them how to revise it. So in that revision lesson, I teach them one strategy, and the strategy is, okay, here's how you revise by checking to make sure that information that goes together is on the same page. So I gave this example earlier, but with a giraffes book, right? All the information that is about what giraffes eat is on one page. All the information about what giraffes live is on a different page. So it's organized that way, right? That's all I teach them in that one lesson. And then I have them go back, check their own books, and maybe fix it up if they need to. Here's another example. Working on opinion writing. And, I've taught them what transition and linking words are. But then I also go back and have a revision lesson on, okay, here's how you can re-look at your piece of writing, your opinion piece, and put in more transition words to make sure that it flows smoothly. So that would be like one revision mini lesson. So when I do that kind of lesson, I model, we practice together, and then usually I will ask them to take out one piece of their own writing. And during that, that writing time, I'll kind of help them if they need help. They may be able to do it on their own, depending on what it is, but I'll have them revise based upon the strategy that I just taught them. So the reason why I do this is because I've just found that it's more effective usually than teaching just a lesson on revising in general, because that can become a little overwhelming if you're introducing so many different ways that they can revise, because there are so many different ways that you can revise a piece of writing. But that said, at the end of a writing unit, I will kind of encourage them to, at least in first and second grade, to bring those different strategies that they've learned throughout the unit together. So then I do encourage them to try to use more than one strategy in one sitting. In your freebie, you're going to find a list of suggestions for these one strategy revising lessons. It's divided, I think I divided it up by like narrative. Here's how you can, here are different ways you can teach kids to revise with narrative writing, opinion writing, and informational writing. So definitely look for that in your freebie. Okay. If you remember on that initial slide that I had with best practices, I said that peer revising, per the research, was effective only when it was combined with clear strategy, clear criteria, which was like the rubrics or checklists, and strategy instruction that we do using the gradual release model. So basically that just means before we start asking our kids to work together to revise, which is super effective, by the way, we first need to have taught them some strategies that they can use, right? And they need to have clear criteria so that they know what to work toward. This is in your freebie, so no need to write it down, but this is what I have kids do when they're working together to revise. I also have them use this strategy when they're working together to edit, but just since we're focusing on revising now, it just says peer revising, but it works for both. So here's what they do. 2 kids sit down together. They've both got their pieces of writing. They've got a rubric or checklist, probably 2 copies. Sometimes I like to have them use small sticky notes. This is more for editing, because with the small ones, you can have them, like if there's a missing period, you can have them write it on there and stick it on the actual paper so they can go back and fix it later. And they'll have pencils too. So the first student will read their own work aloud, right? Both kids talk about how to make the writing better. This is not something where they like swap papers. It's active, right? Sometimes they can't read each other's writing. So then after they've talked about it, or while they're talking about it, student A is writing down ideas on sticky notes. My personal preference is, though, to have that student like mark the rubric as she's going, right? The actual revisions to the writing are not made during the conference, because otherwise what you have happen is student A is like madly erasing, student B is sitting there doing nothing, and that's not what we want, right? So I have them make the changes later. I skipped step 5, but basically after they've talked about student A's writing, student A has got down some things that she needs to change, then student B does the same thing. Student B reads their work, they talk about how to make the writing better. Ideas go down, whether it's just circling on a rubric or actually writing a couple of things down on sticky notes. They don't write on each other's writing. I'm big on like respecting the writer. And then after they've talked about both pieces of writing, then they both go back to their seats separately, and that's where they make the changes. So this process can be super helpful for kids because if you think about it, as adult writers, it's hard for us to see our own mistakes, like I was talking about earlier, right? When we give our writing to someone else to look at, or when we read it to someone else, like in this process, we get more ideas because somebody else is bringing a different perspective to the table. So the same is true of kids, right? They're getting more ideas for fixing up their work than if they were doing it by themselves. But it can be hard to get them to work together productively, right? And be kind to each other. So here are some tips that have helped our peer revision conversations go a little bit better with my kids. So the first thing I teach them is after they listen to somebody's writing or, during, if they're pausing to talk, always want to start with positive feedback, something that they liked. And a lot of times what you might find is that kids maybe do have ideas to share with each other, but they're not sure how to start, or they're not quite sure what to say. So in your freebie, I've got a bunch of sentence starters for you. You can just teach them like 2 or 3, but teach them to say, I liked blank, or maybe you could add blank. You can have them out when the kids are peer revising. It just helps get them started. It's also really helpful for kids to see what a real, peer revising conversation looks like. And it's hard to model by yourself if it's just you. So a couple of things you can do. I've had like another teacher come in and we like model what it looks like. That can be fun. Another thing you can do is a fishbowl where if you've got, 2 brave kiddos. I haven't done this with kinder, but like first and second. If you've got 2 brave kids who are doing well with this process, have them come sit in the middle of a circle, the other kids watch, and they have like part of or all of a peer revising conversation right then and there, and the other kids get to watch and learn from that. Same thing goes with video recording. A lot of times my kids have just loved to be on video. So you can use an iPad or whatever to record them. If you have kids who do really well with their peer revising or editing, you can record that conversation. You can share it with the class and talk about what went well, or maybe what could be changed too. Another thing that's helped me, and this is what I mentioned, has truly been a game changer for my first and second graders, but designating a specific area in the classroom where they can always go to work with a partner to revise and edit during writing time. That's super helpful. And toward the end here, we're going to talk more in depth about that. Okay, I know I've missed some questions. Let me see if I can pick up 1 or 2. I see glow and grow from Catherine. That's awesome. Yeah, so glow being something that they did really well, and then something that they can grow on. That's great. And it makes it really simple too. It's not, kids don't have to feel like they need to tell their partner like a million things that could be fixed. If they can just find one thing, that's helpful, right? All right. Let's see. Caitlin says, how do you make sure your students are prepared to do well according to a rubric with many elements when only teaching one strategy at a time? So I guess, Caitlin, it just happens over time, right? Somebody last night said, how do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. With the rubric, you don't have to present all of it to them at once, right? You can just have, you have the rubric in mind, what you're working toward, but you just give them part of it at once, right? Just eat the elephant 1 bite at a time. Lisa says, my kinders cannot read yet. Not sure how peer revising will work. So Lisa, just keep it simple. Once they're at the point where they're writing little stories with kinder, it's taking all that I'm saying and making it very simple, very focused on like one thing you want them to do. So maybe, Lisa, you say you teach them about beginning, middle, end, and maybe they sit down with a partner and they just look for beginning, middle, end with their partner's work, right? Their partner reads to them, pretend reads, because a lot of kids, you said, they're not reading it, of course. They pretend read their writing. Hopefully they remember what it said. And then their partner tells them, did they notice a beginning, middle, and end? So it's just taking these same principles, Lisa, and applying them to wherever your kids are right now, Okay. So now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it with editing. We will talk about what the research says about teaching editing, some strategies for getting our students to edit. I have some fun freebies that I'll show you what these look like too with editing. And I'll also talk about incorporating grammar and language arts instruction into writing time. So shifting gears, when we're thinking about editing, this is more of those minor changes, right? Capitalization, spelling, punctuation, grammar, all of these things. Excuse me. Maybe you've had the experience, I know I have, where you're sitting down with a child and you want to maybe work on editing with them or help them edit their work. And there's all kinds of errors, right? There's some missing capital letters and periods, but then there's like some subject-verb agreement issues going on. And then maybe they've got some dialogue in their writing or they've attempted it, which is awesome, but they don't have quotation marks yet, right? There's so much that we could correct, that we could try to teach them to edit for. But we don't want to overwhelm the child, right? It wouldn't be productive to make them correct every single little thing. So we have to decide what's most important, right? What correction would this child benefit from, right? What's appropriate for them at this time? The standards, whatever standards you have, can also guide you in knowing what editing skills students should master at each grade level. And so what I did is, if you use the Common Core standards or if your state does something similar, I broke down the standards that would have to do with editing. There's also some like language standards, at least in another, it's a different Common Core standard, but this is kind of like the basics, the essentials of editing. And so I broke it up into capitalization expectations, punctuation, and spelling expectations. And so one thing to remember here is that it's cumulative. So let's say that you're teaching third grade, and the expectation there is that you kids master capitalizing words in titles. Well, that's fine, but chances are, your kids may not have perfected capitalizing holidays, product names, geographic names. Maybe even some of this they need to work on. So if you use the Common Core standards and you look at this chart, just be aware that all of this is cumulative. So you're probably going to have to look back at least one grade level to see what other things you might want to review. So once we know what we want our kids to edit for, then how do we get them to edit, right? How do we teach them all these skills and get them to find mistakes in their writing? Here's a quote that tells us what not to do. So this says, traditional grammar exercises taught out of context from writing instruction frequently reduce student interest levels, meaning they're boring, and have very little impact on student writing. So this is referring to things like sentence fixing exercises. And sentence fixing exercises are pretty common. I've done them. Maybe some of you have done them. The unfortunate part, though, is when we use those too much, or if that's the only way that we teach the kids how to edit, it's not super effective, right? When kids are doing those types of exercises, they're out of the context of their normal writing, right? Like none of us or nobody we know goes into the office every day and has a sentence fixing exercise to do, right? Or that's not part of our teaching job either. We need to write things that are correct. We need to use capital letters correctly, use punctuation correctly, right? So kids need to do that too. They need to practice using their grammar and editing skills in real writing. And sometimes there can be a real disconnect. I always tell this story because it just sticks out in my mind. One year I had 2 second graders and well, I had more than 2 second graders, but 2 of my second graders were really struggling with like the editing component of writing. And I had, one of them was a little boy and a little girl, and one of them was like not capitalizing I. It just kind of blew my mind because I'd moved from kinder to second. And I was like, oh my gosh, I thought they knew this by now. They were having issues like even spacing between words appropriately, not using capitalization, punctuation, all sorts of issues. So at that time, I had been given a writing program to teach. And this writing program had like every couple of, every week or whatever, there was like a sentence fixing exercise. And I didn't really do them because I knew that they weren't super effective. But one day I just, I opened the page. I was like, okay, you know what? Let's try this. So I put 1 or 2 up on the board, and the kids were like, oh, they knew what it was because I guess they'd done a lot of them in first grade. So I saw these 2 little kiddos that were struggling. I saw both of their hands go up. And I'm like, okay, let's see if they can do this. So I called on both of them during this little activity. And what I found was that first of all, they were super excited about doing it for some reason. Second of all, which doesn't make the case here, but that's just what happened. Second of all, they were really good at doing the sentence fixing exercises. They were able to show me the mistakes in the sentences and tell me how to fix them. And my mind was just boggled because here were these 2 kids who I just couldn't get to use capitalization and punctuation correctly, and they could do the sentence fixing exercises almost perfectly. So it was frustrating for sure, but it just kind of goes to show that when we use exercises like these, we've got to keep in mind there is a disconnect between what we're doing with that, in isolation, editing a sentence, and having them apply it to their own writing. So now what we're going to talk about is instead of doing just these, what can we do instead? It's not to say that you have to abandon all sentence fixing altogether, but what I prefer to do is, and I'll show you in a little bit here, I'll show them correct examples before I then ask them to fix it, right? So again, we want to show our kids what good writing looks like, right? If we're constantly showing them examples of bad writing or incorrect writing, then that's what sticks in their heads, right? We want to show them what they should strive toward. So although it's okay to, do them once in a while, we want to constantly show them examples of good writing and point out examples of how the author has, used punctuation correctly, used spelling correctly, use capitalization correctly. We can use real books, real text. I think I saw somebody talking about mentor sentences, which I don't use, but I'm kind of familiar with. We can use sentences from real text or real text themselves as the starting point for talking about these skills, right? And pointing out how the author used them correctly. So again, we don't necessarily have to eliminate all sentence fixing types of activities, but kids need to spend more time seeing and talking about conventions used correctly. It's also important that when we're teaching them like a grammar or editing skill, that they actually get to try it out in their own writing. So instead of just doing only sentence fixing exercises, why not have them go back to a piece of writing that's finished or almost finished and find an example of either, where they use a skill correctly, like a capital letter correctly, or where they need to fix something up, right? So the way that I prefer to do this is in my writing units, I'll build in editing lessons periodically. So, I'll teach a couple of lessons on content, and then I'll throw in an editing lesson, some more lessons on content, and then editing, right? It's just every so often. Let's say that I'm teaching a how-to writing unit, right? Do a couple of lessons, and then I'll throw in a lesson on using commas in a list because that's really relevant to how-to writing. They've got to, make a sentence about here's how to make a PB&J. You will need peanut butter, comma, jelly, comma, bread, comma, a knife. You get the picture, right? Using commas in a list is relevant to the real writing that they're doing in a how-to writing unit. So what I would do then is I would show them how to do it, and then I'd have them go back to their own writing and try it out right then and there. So my grammar and my editing instruction is done primarily during that writing workshop time because they can apply it to their writing right away. I may supplement that instruction with some morning work. If you use my first or second writing units, then you know that I do have some little supplemental activities to reinforce what I teach during the writing block. Or I may have a separate grammar lesson once in a while. They do benefit from that extra practice, but the majority of my editing and grammar instruction takes place in the context of writing workshop. So now I'm going to walk you through kind of an example of an editing lesson that teaches kids about using question marks, right? And you're going to see me do it in the context of real reading and writing. Well, not see me do it, but I'll explain how I do it. So the first thing I'm going to do, which I'll show you in a second, is I'm going to bring a book to this lesson that the kids are already familiar with, something that I read, earlier that day or yesterday. I don't necessarily want to use a brand new book because I'm not like trying to teach them anything or read them a story. I'm just trying to get them to focus on an aspect of the print, question marks, in this example that I'm going to give. Then I want to point out how the author uses the convention, question marks, for example, in the context of the text, talk about why they did it and what effect it has on us as the reader. And then the final part is I want my students typically to try it out in their own writing. So we're going from looking at the convention in real writing or published writing to getting them to try it out in their writing. So it's very meaningful. It's very contextualized. So here's my little example lesson. Let's say that we are doing a nonfiction writing unit, and I want my kids to be, including question marks at the end of the sentences when it applies, right? So I've got this book on jellyfish, and I read it at a different time of the day or yesterday, and I bring it back. Boys and girls, do you remember when we read this book? This was nonfiction, just like the books that we are writing, right? So then I'm going to turn to one of these pages, put it under the document camera, and point out the question mark or have them find it for me, right? And then I'll talk about, question marks go at the end of questions instead of a period or exclamation point. And then I'll explain, sometimes authors use questions to organize their nonfiction books. They imagine what a reader might wonder about, and then they teach the reader about it. So I'd kind of show them the different headings. They would point out the question mark at the end of each, right? We talk about what effect it has on us as the reader. It makes us think and wonder about things. And then the author, you can't see it, but the text will teach us about it, right? And then this is something that they can try out in their own nonfiction writing too. So my kids always have at least a couple of finished pieces in their writing folders. And I'll say, okay, now what I'd like you to do is go take out a nonfiction book that's finished or that's almost finished. And I'd like you to try to write some of your own headings that are questions and make sure to include that question mark at the end. So again, it's pretty simple. I just take a book that I've already read to the kids. I point out how the author used this punctuation mark, right? And then I have them try and go do it in their own writing. And this is something, obviously that we revisit throughout the year. So later on, I'll take another book. We'll talk about question marks or end punctuation again, right? I want to show them many times, many examples of real text and have them use it in their own writing. So back to thinking about best practices in editing instruction. Some other best practices for teaching editing are super similar to those for teaching revising. Again, we want to model and think aloud, use rubrics and checklists. We want to teach spelling strategies so that kids aren't relying upon us for spelling every word. We want to teach them to, stretch out the words, listen to sounds, use word parts that they know, whatever is applicable to this stage that they're at in development. And then we also want to teach our kids how to peer edit. Like I said before, this is super powerful because we become blind to our own errors when we're writing. I'll have looked something over 3 times and then someone's like, hey, you're missing this period or this, quotation mark. It happens all the time. So this is why peer editing is so valuable. Obviously, we start off very small with our little ones in doing this, but it's very valuable because it just puts another pair of eyes on their writing. So super excited to share this with you. In the freebie, you're going to find this resource that you can print and use tomorrow if you want. It's that simple. And these are called conventions cards. And so I was kind of feeling like a broken record, like use your capital letters, use your periods, right? Like just repeating myself so much about these, simple things that they should be doing in their writing. And something that I wanted to do instead was give, well, not instead, but in addition to, was give positive feedback. So I developed these conventions cards, and you'll see them in your freebie. I like to print them on colored paper, talk them up to the kids, make them this big deal so that they're excited. And then at the beginning of the year, I'll just like make a stack of them, put them somewhere. I can use them throughout the year. I would say once a week, I'll grab a stack of them. During writing time, I'll start walking around, not saying anything, but looking for kids who maybe are doing a great job with their capital letters, are doing a really good job using spelling strategies, different editing skills that they're doing well with. So if I see a child who is doing well with something, I'll just slide a conventions card onto their desk, give them a little thumbs up, and keep on walking. So by doing this, I'm accomplishing a number of things. First of all, when they see those convention cards coming out, they really like them. They get to collect them in their folder. It's just a piece of paper, but it's thrilling for some reason. It's all how you present it. But they see me with the cards. They start fixing up their writing right away because they know what I'm looking for because I've taught them that. The child who gets one of these, or the children who get these, they're super excited. They're reinforced in what they're doing. They're encouraged to keep doing it, right? The kids around them also see that that one student has gotten a card and they're like, oh, I got to fix up my work right now, right? They're putting in their periods or whatever because they want a card too. So these are very simple, but they're very fun. And there's a set of these that you can use in your freebie that you'll be getting pretty shortly here. Okay, so here is another fun little activity just to make editing a little bit more exciting. This is the COPS editing flipbook. And COPS here stands for capitalization, organization. Organization, not in terms of content. I know it's a little confusing, but here it means more like organization with spaces between words, or organization with neat handwriting, organization with, if you're in, second grade or you teach second grade, maybe paragraphing. So it's more that than actual content. Then we've got punctuation, and then we've got spelling. And the purpose of this book has a couple purposes, but one of them is to kind of create a running list of different skills that you're teaching the kids. They each get one of these. And as you can see underneath the flaps, either you can write it or put in a little picture for them. That's what I do with kinder, first grade too, potentially. You can put the stuff that you want them to focus on. You can write it there or type it or whatever. Or you can have them keep a running list. But let's say with capitalization, you go over capitalizing the first word in a sentence, and then they or you write it underneath. And then later on, you teach capitalizing words and a date. Then you write it underneath. So it just becomes a running list. But it's super purposeful when it's time to edit. I don't have them use this every time they edit. It's kind of like a special thing, super fun. I'll keep a basket of their little COPS flip books. You can put them in the folders, but they tend to get destroyed. So I like to keep them in a basket. And when we're editing a piece and fixing it up to share, they'll get to use their COPS flip books. And so remember, underneath, they've got what they're supposed to be editing for. And they can either do this individually or with a partner. They will look under the first flap, which is capitalization, and they will read the piece of writing only looking for capitalization errors. Then they'll put the flap down. Then they'll open up organization. They'll read their piece of writing a second time, only looking for organization errors. and then a third time and a fourth time, right? So by the time they're done, they will have read their writing 4 separate times, and each time they were focused only on one type of error. And this is super helpful. This is something, I mean, I don't have a COPS flip book at home, but when I'm creating like lessons and things for you guys, this is what I do when I'm editing. When I edit, I look for only one type of mistake at a time, and then I'll reread and look for a different type of mistake. So the getting them to focus on just one thing at a time or one set of things at a time is super helpful. It's fun. And like I said, I only do this when we're typically like finishing up a piece to present it or share it. So it's a little bit special. And then all of these materials, not the construction paper, but all of the printables are going to be in your freebie. It's really simple to make. I just take a regular piece of construction paper, fold it in half hot dog style, cut the strips here. I usually cut them for them. They get to glue these on. And then underneath, again, it depends. Do you want to like type out stuff, or do you want the kids to write it? It just depends. Like second graders can probably write it, kinder and first. Sometimes I just like to do it for them. But again, you're making kind of a running list of all the different skills that you've taught for all of these, capitalization, punctuation, spelling, etc. Okay, looking at our time. I know we've gone over an hour. I'm going to skip questions for now, but I will definitely come back to more at the end. I just want to keep going because there's a bit more that I want to share. And then, of course, we're doing the giveaway and freebie and all of that good stuff. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some ways that you can make revising and editing part of your daily classroom routine, because we all know that the kids need a lot of reinforcement and practice. So it's important that it becomes just part of your everyday, writing during any time of the day too, when you are writing or the kids are writing. So I already touched on this briefly, but I mentioned that I do plan specific lessons on revising and editing. In my writing units, I plan them ahead of time so that the skills that I'm teaching are relevant to the genre of writing. I gave you that how-to writing example already with commas in a list, because when kids are doing how-to writing, they are, telling the reader, okay, well, to make this, you need paper, scissors, whatever, right? So teaching kids how to use commas in a list is super relevant to that genre. So at the beginning of the year, or when I planned out my writing units, I really thought, what would make sense? Because again, like I said earlier, I want the kids to see it in the text that we're reading and then use it in their own writing. I also want to show my kids that writers are constantly revising and editing their work. So whether we're doing like a reading response or science or social studies, I'm always modeling how I make my writing better. I'm thinking aloud, oh, you know what, boys and girls, I think it would be better if we said this, or, oh, I made a mistake, now I need to fix it, right? I'm constantly trying to show them that and think aloud. Okay, so this is what I'm super excited to share everything, but this is something that just has totally changed revising and editing. This is something that I do in first and second grade. Kinder teachers, hang on, because I will tell you what I do instead in a second. But something you can try out is a revising and editing table. And this is a table in your classroom where the kids go during writing time when they're writing independently to revise and edit with a partner. So physically being in another space in the classroom has really helped my kids get in a different mindset. What I was finding is that they were like, I'm done, I'm finished with this, it just goes in the folder. I might ask them, hey, did you, revise and edit that? Did you look it over? And they're like, yeah. But they haven't, they haven't found any mistakes. They haven't really looked it over. But for whatever reason, physically getting up, moving to a different place in the classroom, getting to work with a friend or a partner to get help fixing up their work, it really works. It helps them find their mistakes. For me, it just goes so much better than expecting them to, continue to sit at their seat and revise and edit every time they finish a piece. So this is a photo from my previous second grade classroom. It's just any old table, as you can see. It doesn't have to be the revising and editing table all day long. This was this particular year. So I had another teacher push in for guided reading, and that was her guided reading table. I use this for math small group. It wasn't just for revising and editing. It just becomes that during the writing time. This thing was not on it. It was actually really tall and heavy. I prefer, when I can, to have this table close to the wall so that I can hang, reminders, the procedures and stuff for using the table. This particular year, I just couldn't get it close to a wall because it was like a small classroom. So you want to post your reminders, show them what they're supposed to do. And then on the table, you can have this bin, right? Just any old bin. But if you stick like rubrics or checklists in it, if you want to have them use little sticky notes, if you do special writing pens or anything like that, I know some teachers like to do that, you can put those in the bin. You just have one kid be responsible for sticking the bin on the table. I forget, so I make a kid do it, but they just stick the bin on the table when it's writing time, and you're all set up, right? It doesn't have to be anything special. It's just any old table. So this is what the kids do when they're at the table. This is in your freebie, so no need to write it down. That's basically the same like procedures here that I had listed out for them. So they go to the table when they're ready to revise and edit, in the workshop model, the way I do things, the kids are not all finishing at the same time. So, one child's ready to revise and edit a piece. They've finished a piece. They don't need to tell me, Mrs. Ryan, I'm done. They just need to go to the table, right? They need to sit down, and then they're going to work by themselves until someone else arrives. So when they have a partner, they read their work aloud to their partner, right? We're not swapping papers. They often cannot read each other's writing. Just like I talked about before, they talk about the writing, how to make it better. It's helpful. You can have the quote unquote evaluator. You can have them write on a rubric or checklist, but I like to have the person who wrote the piece jot things down or make little marks to change. If you use the Glow and Grow, like someone mentioned, if you just have like even a little half sheet with like a star and then, I don't know, like a little triangle for change, delta or whatever, you can give them that. Just something where they are recording what needs to be changed. And so this is why, one of the reasons why I don't do it in kinder, because they do need to be able to like jot something down. Anyway, so they talk about it, a little feedback, positive feedback for sure. Then they switch roles and then they go back to their own seats. And that's where they make changes to their writing, because if you have them do it at the table, you're going to have that problem where one kid's writing and the other kid's sitting and doing nothing. And the other thing is that, with this photo, like it wasn't a huge table, right? It doesn't have to be a huge table. Probably can't be a huge table. So you can't have your entire class there at once. So that's why they talk about how to make the changes. They go back to their seats, and that's where they actually fix their writing. So if you're thinking about trying out a revising and editing table, I would recommend, set it up. Don't wait till the end of the year, but don't set it up too early, because the kids need to have mastered writing workshop procedures, routines. They need to have some revising strategies on their own. They need to know how to do that a little bit before you're asking them to do it with a partner. I did say that for kinder, I do something different. And I kind of mentioned this earlier, but with kinder, it's a lot more guided. I don't have a table off to the side. If your kinders are pretty high, like go for it and let me know how it goes if you try it. But what I prefer to do with kinder is designate certain days throughout the unit. And I say, okay, you know what, today you're going to work with a partner. I'll teach a little mini lesson on some revising or editing skill. Now they're going to work with a partner. They're going to take a piece of writing that's finished or almost finished, and they're going to work with their partner to do what we just talked about. So with that very basic example that I gave earlier, I think it was when I was answering Lisa's question. I think it was Lisa. I was talking about like beginning, middle, end. I show the kids how I check for it, then they work together to check for it. It's very focused, very simple. They can look for more than one thing at once if you've gotten to that point and they have little checklists or whatever. But that's how I do it. It's just a bit more structured than I would do it in first and second. If you do use the table, the ultimate goal is for it to kind of run itself. So like I said before, when the kids are finished with the draft of writing, they're not bombarding me. And it's not that I don't want to help them. It's just that there's 20 something of them and I can't help them all at once, right? I'm going to be in a writing conference, or I'm going to be pulling a small group. So this table gives the kids an opportunity to, without needing your help, get help fixing their writing when they're done with the draft instead of just shoving it in their folder, right? So it runs itself eventually, but the first week that I introduce it, I usually spend a lot of writing time sitting at that table, because during the first week, I tell them how exciting it is to be able to use this table. They're super psyched up to use it. They want to come try it out. So I'm there to support them, right? I'm modeling, I'm showing them how to do things. It's just nice right after you introduce that to be there with them, supporting them as they learn how to do it. Of course, like with anything, we're going to have to model it repeatedly. If you notice the kids are forgetting to follow procedures, close it. Sometimes I'll close the revising and editing table. We'll review things and then I'll reopen it. I truly treat it as a privilege. It's good for them as writers, but it's also a privilege because they get to work with their peers and they really enjoy that. But, don't be afraid to close it if it's not productive, because that's better than it just, becoming a goof off table. I mentioned this earlier. You can do a fishbowl where the kids observe you and another teacher like modeling what it would look like. You can have 2 kids that are hired do this. You can videotape kids and show the class. It's just nice for them to be able to see what it actually looks like, because we can talk to we're blue in the face, but for them to see a real live example or a videoed example can be a lot more powerful. All right, so going to skip questions again. I know I've seen some and I'm going to get to them real soon, but I do want to make sure that we get to the freebie and giveaway. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some information about the resources that I know some of you use already, but I have these in my TPT store to help with teaching writing and revising and editing, of course. So in a minute, I'm going to be pulling names for the giveaway. So like I said, this is a super, super giveaway, because normally you just get one thing, but if you win this time, you get 3 things. You're going to get to choose, if you're a winner, a kinder, first, or second grade writing bundle. You're going to get the revising and editing toolkit, and you're going to get the complement, the author activity pack. So I'll go more in depth on what these are, but the writing bundles are the most comprehensive support for teaching writing, lesson plans, rubrics, visuals. It's very structured for you, but also flexible so that you can bring your own personality into it, bring your, what your kids need into it. But this is the most support. This is a resource that's designed to give your kids support with just revising and editing. It's not as comprehensive as this. This has got all the lesson plans, but this has got a lot of tools that you can use to support your kids with revising and editing. And then this is a set of activities for the interactive board that somebody was mentioning, mentored sentences, kind of like that, where you're showing the kids examples of good writing, and then they are like interacting with them to learn different grammar and editing skills. So the K2 writing units. These are structured so that for each grade level, you're going to get narrative, informational, and opinion writing genres. And these spiral, right? They're flexible in that you don't have to teach them in the exact order. You can teach Unit 2 at a different time. It doesn't have to be second in the school year if you have like a pacing guide or something you have to follow. But because they spiral, you want to teach Unit 2 at some point before you teach Unit 5, because you're addressing narrative writing, and then you're addressing it again, right? Slightly different writing projects, but this one is building on the first narrative unit, and the same is true for the informational and opinion writing genres. So all of these units have complete lessons. Everything's written out for you. I learned the hard way that it's a lot easier to have plans that you can just hand to a sub and be good to go. One time I twisted my ankle while I was running and didn't realize how bad it was till the middle of the night. And then after being awake all night, I had to like limp in at like 5 a.m. to school because I did not have everything quite as written out as I have it now. Super nice in case of emergency, maternity leave, what have you. But these lessons, they're written out what to do. They're also flexible. Like I said, you bring your own knowledge and your approach into it, but they guide you through using mentor texts as well. So typically each unit will have at least one mentor text. They're not in every lesson. They are suggested there are suggested texts, but you can substitute your own as well. Like I was talking about, I do incorporate grammar and editing instruction into my writing instruction. So concepts like correct spelling, grammar, punctuation, capitalization, they're here in these units. The first and second grade units also have these supplementary activities. I like to reinforce what we're doing in our writing block, just with a couple of minutes in the morning. A lot of times they're things like, okay, look for the correct capital letters in these 2 sentences, and maybe they're going to complete or fix 1 sentence later. But again, we're showing them correct stuff before we ask them to fix anything. And then another thing about these units, they're designed so that you're not constantly going on Pinterest or whatever to search for stuff. There are visuals, there are rubrics, student writing paper, anything in color is also in black and white. It's designed to be pretty comprehensive, so you should have what you need in one place. So those were the writing units. And again, if you're a giveaway winner, you're going to get one of those bundles. You're also going to get the revising and editing toolkit. So this is for Kinder First or Second, and you'll see that it addresses a wide range of abilities. It's not really just for the average here. I wanted to address so many different abilities because we all know sometimes we get second graders who are on a kindergarten level, right? Or sometimes we have kindergartners who are more advanced. So I put them all here so that you can meet the needs of your kids regardless of what level they're at. And part of this toolkit is the strategy cards and posters. Like I was talking about earlier, I do teach revising and editing strategies just one at a time. These visuals can support, I can revise my writing by adding specific examples. You can post that up there. You can also, there's these like quarter page size versions of these. So you can print these and have the kids put them in their folders, and you can give different kids different cards so that they have different goals that they're working toward. Before I mentioned using leveled rubrics and checklists, right? In the revising and editing toolkit, there are different levels of narrative, opinion, informational writing rubrics, or checklists, depending on what you like to use. The writing units do have rubrics and checklists, so you're fine there. But the difference here is that if you want to differentiate some, the differentiation is done for you. You just print them out and you're good. Before also, I was talking about different mentor texts that I use. I design them to have some mistakes or whatever, and then I use to model revising and editing. I've got mentor texts for you in this revising and editing toolkit. You can print it out or display them. There's different versions depending on what you want to teach kids. And then you have something that you can use to model that right away. Last but not least, this resource is a bit different. Like I was talking about, it's important to show kids, good examples of writing. And so this Complement the Author little activity pack is having the kids find correct examples of, capital letters, periods, whatever, in real passages, the passages that I've written. And so the reason I wrote these is because I like to have them find stuff in real text, but the thing is they can't write on a book. So with these passages, you read them aloud, decide what you're going to focus on. So this is like question marks for this one. You can determine what you want the kids to find. It's very flexible that way. You put it on the smartboard and the kids can physically drag these little stars to find different aspects of the print. And again, you're focusing on things that are done correctly. This is also designed so you can work on parts of speech like verbs, nouns, adjectives. Same deal, you just drag the little, or the kids drag the little zigzags to underline the different verbs here so you can physically move them. All right, so excited to do the giveaway. What I'm going to do now is pull a couple of names from my list of everybody who signed up. Again, if you win, you get all 3 of these things. If you hear your name, only if you hear your name, I'm going to ask that you just say, I'm here in the chat box so that I know that you're here live, because you can only win if you're here live. And then I'm also going to ask that you email me and let me know what grade level you want, because this is for K2, but these are grade level specific. So if you're a winner, again, let me know in the chat box that you're here, and then email me, just respond to one of those messages I sent out and let me know what grade level you'd like. All right. Got Thursday. Okay, first winner is Jennifer Scooby-Doo13_12 at yahoo.com. Jennifer, if you're here, let me know. Anna and Mario 628 at AOL.com. Anna, if you're here, let me know. Okay, Sylvia, SPEJER at AOL.com. Sylvia, if you're here, let us know. Ruby, Comedic Prep at AOL.com. Ruby, if you're here, let me know. Lauren SIG at gmail.com. Lauren, if you're here, let me know. Lori Gonzalez at websterkyschools.us. Lori, if you're here, let me know. Janelle Thomas at hotmail.com. Janelle, let me know if you're here. Deborah, DEBIL, I can't read, need my glasses, IND at hotmail.com. Deborah, if you're here, let me know. Jane, J_root at lancaster.k12.oh.us. I'm not seeing any winners. Okay, Katie, theclubs98 at yahoo.com. Katie, let me know if you're here. Okay, Erica, ERY0925 at gmail.com. Erica, if you're here, let me know. Ashley, ASHGER Burton at yahoo.com. Laura, ARUALDR at yahoo.es. Laura, if you're here, let me know. Sabrina S. Lozano at magnoliapublicschools.org. Oh my goodness, I am not seeing anybody. This is a first. Janie, JG Ranger, WRANGER at rgv.rr.com. Jalissa, JALISA C Brown at gmail.com. Jalissa, I cannot believe none of these people are here. That has never happened. Susan S.Penrod at Comcast. Roxanne, RRRIZ at Verizon. Yolanda, YDA4VRA at gmail.com. All right, I'm just going to pull a couple more. Jackie.SCHREPEL at Hotmail. Valerie, Teach222 at hotmail.com. Let's see, Marcia Hudson at gmail.com. Just going to pull a couple more. Brandy B. Sterling at greengateschool.org. Julie, Lee Julie 1977 at yahoo.com. Thanks, you guys, for waiting so patiently. Sonia Robinson at mcdowellk12.nc.us. Anna, ELILLARD at lufkinisd.org. I'm wondering if I'm looking at the right list. Sherry, GROELSEMA at bccs.org. Oh, wrong, Marcia. Bummer. Tracy, VALADEZ at SBC Global. Yeah, I've never gone this long without a winner. Eli, Princess Naya P at yahoo.com. Patricia P. Leal at euroamerican.edu.mx. Mabel, M. Acosta, 777 at Comcast. Wanda, WCC, 1966 at me.com. Allison is crying. Lena25k.cki at gmail.com. This is terrible. Okay, Carrie, AANAKARY at gmail.com. Sherry. All right, we finally got a winner. Yeah, other Sherry. I thought it was maybe the wrong list. That was so crazy. All right, we got a winner. Thanks for your patience. I don't know if maybe that got mixed up with another one. That was bizarre. All right. So if you did not win, thanks for sitting through all of that. I do have a sale for you. I put all of these at 20% off. The sale is going to turn off, though, tomorrow night, which is Friday at midnight Eastern. So if you do want one of these things, make sure that you get it before then. I will put up the link here, and I will also email it to you if it doesn't work for whatever reason. So again, these are discounted 20% through Friday, which is tomorrow. The sale will automatically turn off at midnight Eastern. And let's do the freebie. Thanks, you guys. It's been a long one. Maybe that's why I wasn't getting any winners, because we went so long today. Here is your freebie. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for the past hour and a half. I hope that you got some good ideas to take home. Remember, there's stuff like the conventions cards, the COPS editing flipbook, that's all in your freebie. So hopefully you can use that soon if your kids are ready for it. If you do have to leave us, I totally understand. It's been an hour and a half. But if you can stick around, I do want to answer questions. So if I missed your question, go ahead and retype it with all of that giveaway stuff going on. I know they got pushed down, so please feel free to retype your question, and I will try to answer as many questions as I can. You will be getting a certificate, by the way. In about half an hour, there's going to be an email that goes out, and that email will have links. So it'll have the freebie links, it'll have the slides, it'll have a certificate if you attended live, and then it'll have the stuff that is on sale. It'll have those links as well. All right. Thanks for coming, Lisa. I appreciate you guys. I'm going to scroll down and see what questions I can grab. So Melissa said, I would love to do more of this type of writing with my kinders, but we have so many that still can't write your names, totally understand, or copy sentences. Yeah, so Melissa, during this time in kindergarten, I'm typically doing a lot of, drawing instruction and labeling too. They drew a picture of a tree. This is how you stretch out the sounds and get them to write tree, right? It's going to be invented spelling. It's not going to be correct necessarily, but those are baby steps that we're typically taking in that direction. Okay, Amy says, how early is too early for starting revising an editing table in second grade? Amy, I feel like in second grade, I don't know how long you've been in school, but I would say if you've got 2-3 months under your belt and you feel pretty satisfied with how things are going, and you have, taught the kids at least a little bit about, using rubrics or checklists, revising and editing strategies. They don't have to be totally proficient, but if you've exposed them to some of that stuff and they have some experience, then I feel like, you're good to go with the table. If you want it to go smoothly from the start, you could wait till later on. But like I said, I feel like it's super valuable in getting the kids to see their own mistakes, and fix them. So as long as you've got some of that foundational stuff, Amy, I feel like, you're good to go. All right. So I'll put up the freebie one more time. There should just be I don't know what it will look like on your end. There should just be a button where you can click here. Okay. So Amy says end of first quarter tomorrow. Yeah. So Amy, if you feel like you've taught a lot of this stuff with the rubrics and whatnot, and they know how to, revise it a little bit, I don't think it would be too early if you wanted to start it pretty soon. Good, Alex. I'm glad it was helpful. Thanks for coming. If the freebie button doesn't work, not to worry. Like I said, it is going out to you in the email. Sherry says working with non-writers during writing workshop tips. So Sherry, I'm curious what grade you teach. Like with kinder, as I said, at this point in the year, a lot of it is drawing instruction. Here's how you draw with details. Here's how you add labels. I just try to take the kids where they're at. I do really try to encourage them to use original ideas. Copying has its place for sure in the stages of writing development, but as soon as possible, I try to teach them how to write their own sentences, how to plan them, remember them, and attempt to write them, even if they're a string of letters. I really try to encourage that from as soon as they can at least write words or attempt to write words. Okay, so Melissa said there's a button that says click here in the chat box area on my end. So Melissa's describing how to get the freebie. So hopefully it looks the same on your end. It might look different if you're using your phone or something. Thanks, Debbie and Eileen. I appreciate it. Good. Okay, so Sherry teaches first and second, but I have one student who isn't really writing yet. Sherry, curious if if it's a matter of like spelling, like hesitancy to spell, or if it's a matter of like ideas. I'm curious what do you think the issue is? Thanks, Amy. Amy said bundles are super friendly, better than Lucy Calkins, but similar content as Calkins is what she said. If you're familiar with the units of study, I'm going to put up the link for my stuff one more time. Okay, if spelling. Okay, so Sherry, if it's spelling, I would really encourage that student, because it's first and second, to kind of be a risk taker, right? And I'd really emphasize the fact that it's more important to get their ideas out than it is to have perfect spelling. I try to teach them as many strategies as I could and provide an alphabet chart. Sherry, I don't know if you have my writing folder tools. That's another freebie. If you just go to learningattheprimarypond.com and click on free, I believe that'll get you the writing folder tools. Teach them strategies, and really encourage them, because they're at first or second grade, they need to be getting out that content. Even if the spelling is atrocious, I would really focus on helping them get their ideas on paper, whether it's drawing, writing, or a combination thereof. All righty. Lisa says, my kinders wrote a 3-page story using words and pictures. Awesome. Then I wrote the sentence they read to me and had them rewrite the good copy. I also had them trace over their sentences by using KG primary dots font. Was that okay to try, or should the writing be in their own print? So Lisa, I guess it just depends on what your goal was, So it sounds like your goal was to get them to, and I wrote the sentence. So it sounds like, Lisa, they came up with their own sentences, which I think is awesome. It really just depends. It really depends on what your goal is. Was your goal to get them to focus on handwriting and kind of understand, like, this is the process of writing? If your goal was to get them feeling super independent when they're writing stories, I don't know if that will meet that goal or if they'll feel dependent upon that. It kind of, feel that out. It just kind of really depends on what your goal was. I'm not sure if that's helpful. Leslie says, I received the revising and editing toolkit this summer with the Kinder bundle. Yep, it's the exact same one, Leslie. So you're good to go. Okay, so Beverly's asking, the free thing for spelling, I'll just put it in the chat. I have these things like a vowel chart, an alphabet chart. I teach my kids to use these tools so that they become more independent with their spelling and they're not always relying on me. Okay, so Lisa says, I wanted them to see what the correct writing should look like. Then I think you met your goal, right? I think there's value in having them do it and not look correct. But if you're trying to show them like, hey, this is what we're working toward eventually, then I think, yeah, you're meeting your goal. All right, you guys, we've gone so long tonight. Again, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. It was so much fun getting to share all of this stuff with you. I hope you enjoy using the stuff in the freebie. Remember, if you can just take one small step with this stuff right now, there might be a lot that you want to work on, but just take one small step at a time. Just, eat the elephant one bite at a time, like someone said last night. Keep this stuff, come back to it throughout the school year. If you have questions, you can always email me. I'm happy to help you think through something, but hang on to this stuff, use it just one thing at a time. And anytime you want to email me, feel free to do so. You can reply to any of the emails that I sent for the reminder. You will be getting from me, again, those links, the resources, the freebie, slides, certificate for attending live. If you don't have anything from me by tomorrow night, definitely email me like tomorrow afternoon. And remember that this sale is over tomorrow evening at midnight Eastern. So I think that's all the reminders I had. Thanks for being here. Email me if I missed your question, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.